Okay, first up is Deputy Commissioner Dean Palmier in charge of the Criminal Investigation Bureau. Second up is Stanley Branford, who's also in that Criminal Investigation Bureau in command. Acting Crime Against Persons Director is gentleman there, Donald Bauer. Acting Inspector is Acting Inspector Brian Conaway, Major Brian Conaway. After him, certainly is Captain Robert Sneed. And after him would be John Herzog, who's in charge of citywide shooting incidents. And after him would be Major Chris Jones, in charge of homicide shooting incidents. Okay, and then you have Internal Affairs, Ian Dombrowski. Mr. Dombrowski has come under fire recently in the newspaper, working Internal Affairs Division. Next you have Chief of Professional Responsibility, Chief Rodney Hill. He's overall in charge of the whole Internal Affairs Division here in Baltimore City. Next, recently this month you had retired Dean Palmier again. He's there. Jason Johnson retired this month as well. He was in charge of Strategic Services Bureau. Leave of absence was Chief Stokely, I believe, Stanley Branford. And last, you have Ganesha Martin. She worked directly for the Police Commissioner's Office in the Compliance and Accountability area. And last but not least, fired, as you all know, Commissioner Davis, Kevin Davis. Hey guys, how you doing? This is Mike McCormick with Advanced Criminology here in Owens Mills, Maryland. Today is February the 8th, 2018. Tomorrow is February the 9th, 2018, and yours truly I finally made it to 60 years old. I'm an old man, I guess. I think I've been doing this business a long time. But it's good to get at 60, you know, to reach 60. I'm in fairly decent health, I think. And I'll just keep pushing on. So today's events with the Hersl and Taylor case in downtown Baltimore at the federal courthouse, the jury instructions were finally read and they were given to the jury to take back for a final verdict in this particular case. It's pretty hefty jury instructions that they had. A lot of stuff that's involved in terms of reading through all the documents, sifting through tons and tons of evidence. You know, this case went for 3 weeks, so just imagine if you were a juror and you had to take 3 weeks of your life to sit in a federal trial for 3 weeks and take notes every day for 6 or 7 hours. And then, you know, compare notes and things like that, you know, when you go back into the jury room to decide someone's guilt or innocence. It's certainly time consuming and it can be emotionally draining for people. Now, today you've just looked at several photos, probably like 12 photos, and what I've done is I've wanted you to get an idea of what the structure of the police department looks like from an organizational standpoint. The reason that I do that is because most of you, if you've never really taken any courses that deal with organizational structure, like in business courses and things like that, you would not kind of know the bureaucracy or the layers of bureaucracy that exist in an organization, whether that organization is a for-profit organization or whether that organization is a government organization. And in this case here, we're talking about a government organization. So it's filled with layers of bureaucracy from top to bottom. Lots of times organizations, the way they're structured, a lot of the information and policies are structured at the higher levels, and things filter down through middle management all the way down to the troops on the line, so to speak, to implement the policy. So that's kind of how all police departments are pretty much structured in terms of that bureaucratic model that's been out there for many, many years now. And if you didn't know what the model looks like for Baltimore City, I just got a quick picture of it here. You can see right there, and that's an old picture with Commissioner Davis right there. And so, where we're going to be at this evening is we're going to be talking about this particular structure that's right here. These group of people right here. So when you saw those pictures that just went by, that's the particular part of the organization that I'm talking about, where the Gun Trace Task Force in this particular corruption trial those folks were accountable for those guys in their unit, all the way up the line. And it coincides, if you really follow this case, it coincides with the recent retirement of Deputy Commissioner Dean Palmier, because he's the head man of that he's the head man of that particular division of the police department. And so underneath of him, there were 7 or 8 other people that worked directly underneath of him, and I outlined who they were in the still shots that you just saw. Now, when we get to the other individuals who have retired, been fired, or taken a leave of absence for whatever reason, I suspect, and I've always suspected, that a lot of people, when things get hot in the kitchen, a lot of people want to get out the kitchen. You have a lot of people who have worked on the department for a long time in these command staff positions, and quite frankly, a lot of them will just, if they have 20 years in, they'll just retire. They might want to stay till 25 years, some might want to stay longer, but under the climate that particular department is in right now, these people, when they leave, trust me, they're leaving because of all of the dissension and accusations that are flying left and right now in the department. So it's better for them to kind of get out while they can before they're named in some type of other conspiracy, so to speak. And so that's what goes on. You know, I'm not making light of it, but I'm just telling you that pretty much throughout the country, when there's a scandal in any major police department, the police department circles the wagons. They just do. They circle the wagons around each other, particularly those officers who haven't been indicted. Once those officers got indicted, those 8 officers in the gun squad, the police department at that particular time, turned their back on these guys simply because they knew that these guys had a wealth of information, not just because they were doing wrong and criminal things that they did in the streets of Baltimore. But remember, some of these same staff members that I just showed you worked with some of these guys in different districts around the city before they got into this gun squad. And then a couple of them, you know, got promoted and moved up the rank structure. But they still know who these guys are. And also remember, this was the same gun squad that got touted as a premier gun squad in Baltimore, you know, 4 or 5 years ago, or at least 3 years ago, where, you know, they were ranted about as the guys who were the ones who were making the city safe because they were taking, you know, hundreds of guns off the street. And so I find it funny that the same people who praised these guys 2 years ago cannot be found anywhere in their defense, nor would they come to their defense at this point in time. It's basically political suicide and job suicide to even think about backing any of these guys on these federal gun charges. Excuse me, on these federal corruption charges. So none of the way this whole thing has flowed did not surprise me one bit, because the research is out there. The research that we do and I've done and did in graduate school, you know, when you talking about LAPD, New York City, Chicago, the big cities where corruption, you know, has had its run, it's typically that these things happen the same way, where supervisors begin to retire early. They get moved around, shifted around. A lot of these names for some of these, like the gun trace task force name, will be changed to something else, just so it's not associated with the gun trace task force name in the future. So you'll see all of this going on in this department. Now I'm going to update you. As of this video today, which is February the 8th, the new Baltimore Police Commissioner, Mr. Darrell D'Souza, has reorganized the Baltimore City Police Department's command staff as of today, this very day that I'm speaking to you. I didn't even realize it when I was putting this video together this morning, that that's what was going on behind the scenes. But keep in mind, when that new organizational chart comes out, one of the key things that we want to look at is, where are the faces? Are we seeing the same faces doing different jobs now that were in original positions when the police department was in an uproar with this gun squad? Well, that remains to be seen, because I haven't seen the chart yet, and it's supposed to come out tomorrow, so I certainly will be looking for it. Just to give you a direction, if you want to look for it, it'll be at baltimorepolice.org, and you'll go you'll tab on the command staff, and it'll bring up the organizational chart. Now, they won't have the old chart that I have, the one that you just saw, which is this one here. You won't see that one. Okay, and just to let you know, if I can get it here, right there. Right there. You can't see it, but it says January 17th, 2018. Okay, so that's from January 17th, 2018 on back. Okay, so these folks who are in positions here, right, were in those positions, and if they weren't, they were either in them or just coming into some of these positions while the gun squad had its terror reign on the city of Baltimore. Now, the whole time I sat in the trial a couple days ago, not one supervisor that I saw, who you see here listed, who I'm on the still shots, came into the courtroom at all that I saw. So that tells me, you know, something right there. The other thing about this particular case is that you had Internal Affairs Director, and his name, let me see here, his name was Ian Dombrowski. And I showed you Mr. Dombrowski. There was a picture that just went by, and he was in Internal Affairs Division. He's in charge of that division. And so when complaints come to the Baltimore City Police Department, eventually they filter into that division. Excuse me, they filter into that division, and eventually those reports make their way up the ladder to him. So technically speaking, and he's in charge, those folks who were getting robbed by the gun squad technically filed their complaints through his division, and he overall is responsible for that division. So one would ask the question, you know, why would not he know that these guys were doing what they were doing, and what did he did, and when did he know that the gun squad was going rogue with robberies and theft from the citizens of Baltimore? You see? And so these are the questions that the new commissioner has said that they just came up with this new division that they created to root out corruption in Baltimore City. And so the question would be, since the gun trace officers on trial basically testified that there were at least a dozen or so officers who were additionally involved in misconduct and criminal conduct on the police department, not only during their time while they were on the gun squad, but prior to. Again, Deputy Commissioner Palmer was implicated by one of the officers in a case. His name was Jamel Raham. He was implicated as someone who assisted him in writing a report for a fatal shooting that occurred some time ago. When the Sun papers contacted Commissioner Palmer about this particular allegation from Raham, he immediately and adamantly denied that he doesn't coach officers on how to fill out paperwork when it comes to matters such as shootings, fatal shootings, and use of force. He doesn't do that. Now, I'm going to take you guys back to when I was on the police department, somewhere between 1985. I was involved in a shooting incident in the Murphy Homes section of Baltimore City, and I'll give you the quick synopsis of what happened. Myself and my partner were riding down Dolphin Street, coming from East Baltimore to West Baltimore, from Druid Hill Avenue, headed to Pennsylvania Avenue. In between that block, those of you from Baltimore know exactly what I'm talking about. There are low-rise projects there. We saw two guys that we know that do a lot of robbing in that particular area, and I made eye contact with one of those guys. I told my partner to stop the car and go and check these guys out, because they made eye contact with us and started walking real fast, trying to duck behind the low-rise projects. Well, I jumped out the car, and I started to trot after the guys. They picked up their speed and started to run. One of them spun around. He went into his waist. He spun around with a chrome-plated revolver, and he pointed it at me, and I guess he fired. I didn't hear it go off, but he pointed at me, and I came out of my holster, and I fired 2 shots. I missed, because I can't shoot anybody while I'm running. That just doesn't work, only in the movies. And as he made a left turn, I saw the gun go flying out of his hand. As I turned the corner, they would turn another corner, and that was it. I lost eyesight of them for a couple of minutes. I kept following, and finally I caught up with one of them, and the other one I didn't catch. So, to make a long story short, we recovered the weapon that he actually threw away. When we got down to the station house, we saw that the weapon had 5 rounds in it, and 2 of the rounds had their primers dented. On the back of a round, when a shot is fired, it's usually dented in all cases. That sets off the primer that ejects the propellant that pushes the bullet out of the shell casing. You can go online and look that kind of stuff up on how it works in a revolver. So it's believed that he tried to fire 2 shots and the rounds were bad and they never went off. And so I'm lucky because they didn't go off. I was probably about maybe 30 feet away. I could have been hit. It was hard. He was running, I was running, so it didn't really make too much difference. But this is the point I'm going to make in this whole case, is that the department has a form that's supposed to be filled out, and it's called a 95 form. And that form is designed so that officers can fill out anything that deals with use of force activities, lethal force activities, where you're going to be using weapons, or whether you shot someone, or whether you killed somebody. And you fill those forms out. Now, before that form reaches command staff, that form has to meet certain criteria. If you are an officer and you've never been involved in those type of incidents, you would not know how to write that report. Someone in that department is going to help you write that report, or in this case, coach you how to write that report. So it's written in a way that it can be justified. That's why these reports are scrutinized when officers in the field use their weapons. They're trying to justify why the use of force was needed. And that's why that separate report is written. And if you've never written one, you would be a person that would need assistance. So I find it hard to believe in this particular case that the deputy commissioner has never ever assisted anyone in writing a report, a use of force report, when he was going through the ranks as a sergeant, a lieutenant in the districts where they all start off at. I know my sergeant, my lieutenant helped me out when I was writing a report, use of force report, because I had never written one. And they coached me and they told me what I needed to say, because I just didn't know the law like that. You know, when it came to shootings, I had never shot at anyone before. So when Commissioner Palmeri makes that statement, well, I know differently. And so I just wanted to bring that up, and it'll probably be discussed down the road if it turns out to be anything more than that. But there were several allegations from the gentlemen who were on trial in this particular case. And so one of the other things that came up about, even though we talked about the guy from Internal Affairs whose name was Ian Dabrowski, one of the statements made by one of the guys in the gun squad was that this particular supervisor in charge of that whole Internal Affairs division was allowing the gun squad guys to get basically free overtime. He would approve it. And that was their reward for recovering guns. Okay, so, you know, we don't know whether it's true, but it's a statement that they made. And so all of it should be checked out, and all of it probably will be checked out later on down the road. See, there's a paper trail in this whole case. Trust me. There's a paper trail, and names are on some of these documents. You just can't fill out overtime and then it gets approved at the next level. Somebody's name has to be on it. Somebody has to oversee this kind of stuff, you know, and approve it. So there are names. There's a paper trail in this whole case where they're going to be names, and you're going to hear in the next month or so, you're going to hear that, okay, well, we finally found out that this was approved by this person and that was done by that person, because their name appears somewhere on that document. Remember, the police department is a government agency. You folks who have worked for government agencies, you know what I'm talking about. You fill out paperwork for everything. In addition, somebody's name's going to be on it. And so I just wanted to bring that up. Let's see, who else they implicated? They implicated Sergeant Ryan Ginn, who we already knew, who worked in the gun task force, and we know that he was involved with the narcotic transactions with the sergeant in the guns who ran the gun squad. We know that happened. We know that he was assigned to the police academy at the time. So a lot of these things, you know, we already knew. The question is, how come these people haven't been prosecuted? That's the big question. I got it that you went after the 8 guys. FBI made that case. But now that the FBI has made their case against these 8 gun officers, Who's going to make the case against these other officers who are out there still working and still collecting the paycheck on you and our taxpayers' dollars? Because this has to stop. We have to hold our police department and the members of the police department accountable for their actions, particularly when these actions lead to a lot of other things, and we already know what those things are. Now, let me tell you something. I was in the courtroom the other day, and I'm talking to a state's attorney from Baltimore City. And one of the questions she asked me, she says, well, Mike, I'm just trying to figure out how come a couple of these guys weren't charged with reckless endangerment and murder. And I said, well, why? She said, because somebody died in that car crash when they were chasing these guys who were wanted for drug transactions which never took place. And also they spent several years in prison before they were released. And had it not been for the officers who manufactured the case, who planted evidence in the beginning, the old fella, the retired fella, wouldn't be dead, and his wife wouldn't be a widow to this day. And so she said, I don't understand why that was never pursued. And my only response to her was, you know what, you're right. I don't know why it wasn't pursued. Because somebody died that didn't have to die. And so I just wanted to, let you guys know what some of the talk is, going on right now within, state's attorney's office, and why can't we, hold people accountable for people's deaths? That's just the way it is, So that was interesting. Now, there are several other officers. The list is too long to go into as to what they are implicated in doing, along with these gun trace officers in this case. But I will tell you that a lot of the testimony from the officers from the stand sounds credible. It just sounds credible. The reason it sounds credible is because of some of the things that I've seen before in the past that go on in the police department. So for somebody who hasn't been in the police department, you might say that, okay, well, these guys are on trial. They're in a bunch of trouble, so they would lie to do anything or say anything. And that's true. But oftentimes within a lie, there's a truth. And so I truly believe in some of these cases where they've admitted to some of the activities by other officers on the Baltimore Police Department, that it is in fact true. And it needs to be investigated. And let the investigation go where it goes. If those guys aren't found guilty of doing anything, then fine. But you got to have an investigation, because remember, you want to be able to root out corruption. And what happens lots of times is that officers, particularly rogue officers or officers who are dirty, they'll sit back and they'll watch like this. They'll watch the guys who are dirty on the department right now. They're watching this case play out, and they're trying to see what's going to happen with these guys, how much time these guys get for doing what they did. And as long as their names are not coming up, these guys will continue to do the same thing in the streets that they've been doing under another name in another area of the city, until you got to get to the root of it, and you got to get everybody out of that department that comes close to any form of corruption, for it to be the kind of department that they want it to be. And that's just the way it is. It can't be any other kind of way. Else we're going to see another gun squad 5 years from now, and we'll be asking the same questions that we're asking now 5 years from now, the same thing. Well, I thought you guys got all rooted out all the corruption. Now it's something else going on. So that's why you can't stop where it is. You got to take what those guys said on the stand and investigate. If it turns out okay, fine. If not, that's fine too. At least you made the attempt to do the investigation. Okay. But as I started off in this whole video, was in other words, what we're seeing right now is typical, where you have a bunch of young men who are pretty much the line troops out there on the line, out there working. They get in trouble, they do criminal acts, and all of a sudden, every supervisor, every command staff person is nowhere to be found, is nowhere to be charged. And that's the problem. You cannot move people around, shift them around in the department and say, okay, I've moved people around in different areas now, and therefore we shouldn't have a problem. Well, you're going to have a problem, because some of the same people, they're still there. Okay, so when you see, like I've rolled 5 different still shots of folks who just recently, left the department. Again, they're leaving because various reasons, but I tend to believe because of the gun squad shakeup, that these folks decided that they had to go and had to leave early. So I wanted to bring that to to your case. I mean, to your attention. I'm sorry. So now tomorrow is the 9th, again, my birthday. However, I'll be at criminal court tomorrow, federal criminal court again, because I'll be downtown for the verdict. I'll probably be talking to a couple of news media outlets. They're probably just going to ask me my opinion. Well, you guys kind of know, you follow advanced criminology, you follow the Mike report, and I put out a video 2 weeks ago indicating that the officers in this particular case would be found guilty. And they will be found guilty because the RICO statute is designed to get you caught up in a corruption case. No matter whatever part you play in it, as I told you before, you could be a person just standing on the corner pointing to the drug house, and you will get 20 years for that finger pointing that you just did in a RICO corruption style case. Whether you, and again, it's a situation, and here the technicality in federal law is it has to be two separate crimes, so to speak, or two separate times. I'm making a lay person's explanation. You have to have two separate incidents where you involved in some type of corruption for you to meet the elements of that charge. And so that's some of the things that the jury is going to be looking at now. So they'll look at dates. That's so important in RICO cases, are dates, because the dates and the times are what binds you to the ongoing corruption. So even if you do something, let's say today, if I never go back and do the same thing until December of this year, okay, and I do the same thing I just did today in February, right, that is part of a conspiracy, a continuing conspiracy. A lot of folks don't know that, but it is. And you can go to jail for a very long time being involved in a criminal racketeering and corruption case. And that's why the government uses that case when they go after organized crime, whether it's the mafia, you know, whether it's the Black Guerrilla family, it doesn't matter. Those are the charges that they use, and those are the charges usually that stick. Now, I told you a while back in the last video with these two guys, Hersl and Taylor, I did not know why they did not take the plea that was offered to them. I'm sure it was a better deal than what they're going to get should they get found guilty tomorrow in this case. Because trust me, they're going to be doing some time in this case if, in fact, the jury comes back with a verdict of guilt. So with that, I'm going to end the video right now. And I will talk to you guys tomorrow evening. I'll put out another video after the verdict to go into what counts they got found guilty on. And we'll go from there and see what develops. I want to thank you guys for your comments. As always, you've been commenting a whole lot this week. I appreciate it. And I'll try to get to you as soon as possible. You know I do. Those folks who comment, and I try to give you good information when I do comment back. Make sure you subscribe to the channel if you haven't. And I appreciate your time. Thank you.